She shared her secret in the parking garage, unaware the CEO was listening. Enjoy listening.
I just feel invisible sometimes. Like the system was not built for someone like me. Thank you. I did not expect help this morning.
Everyone needs help sometimes.
If we adjust the distribution timeline, we can reduce cost variance by 12%.
Continue.
This only works if contract analysts are included earlier in planning.
I understand.
Our growth depends on structural accountability.
He knew. You controlled the frame.
I did not intend to.
Intent does not erase impact.
If we are serious about inclusion, it has to be structural.
Temporary roles are excluded too late in the process.
She is right. Then we change the process.
I have options.
I received another offer. If I stay, it is because the system is changing.
I assumed you might. That is the only reason it should be.
Did you see this update?
Yes.
This continues only if it stays transparent.
It does. I am not staying for you.
I know.
I am staying because it changed.
Then it was worth changing.
We keep it accountable.
We keep it honest.
Before we begin tonight's story, I want you to take a moment to slow down. Settle in. Let this be a pause in your day. What you are about to hear is not simply a romance. It is a story about power responsibility and the fragile space between being heard and being exposed. What happens when the most powerful man in a building hears something that was never meant for power? If stories like this speak to you, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It truly helps this channel grow and continue sharing meaningful narratives. And I would love to hear from you. Have you ever spoken honestly in a place you believed was private, only to discover later that it was not? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Now let us begin. The parking garage beneath the company headquarters was not a place designed for reflection. It was concrete and steel. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale shadows across oil-stained floors. Sound traveled strangely there. Engines echoed. Footsteps lingered longer than they should have. At 7:42 in the morning, Elena Carter sat alone in her aging silver sedan on level B2. She was 29 years old. She was on a temporary contract in operations support. She had learned how to make herself efficient, agreeable, invisible. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine clicked. Failed. She tried again. Nothing. Her phone was wedged between her shoulder and ear, and her voice, though controlled, trembled at the edges. "I just feel tired," she said quietly. "Tired of pretending I belong in rooms that were never built for people like me." She believed she was alone. In a parking garage, privacy feels assumed. No one stays longer than necessary. No one lingers in vulnerability. "I grew up watching my mother decide which bill could wait." She continued, "You learn to shrink yourself when you come from that. You learn that survival comes first. Confidence comes later, maybe." Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The concrete structure carried her voice farther than she realized. 2 rows away, a black sedan had just gone silent. Daniel Hayes stepped out, locking his car with a soft electronic chirp. He paused when he heard her words. Not because they were loud, but because they were unfiltered. He could have cleared his throat. He could have made his presence obvious. He could have chosen to grant her the privacy she assumed she had. He did not. Listening is never neutral when you hold power. Daniel stood still, keys in hand, and listened to a stranger confess the quiet architecture of her life. There was no performance in her voice, no manipulation, no ambition layered beneath it, only exhaustion, only truth. He knew even then that remaining silent was a decision. The engine clicked again, failed again. Elena wiped quickly at her eyes, embarrassed, even though no one was supposed to see. Daniel hesitated for a moment longer. Then he stepped forward, careful not to startle her. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "It sounds like your battery might be dead." She turned sharply, startled. Fear flickered across her face before embarrassment replaced it. "I am sorry," she said quickly, ending the call. "I did not realize anyone was here. It is a parking garage," he replied gently. "It echoes." He did not introduce himself. He did not mention the 22 floors of authority above them. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt and walked toward the front of her car. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the hood. She nodded. He retrieved jumper cables from his trunk with practiced efficiency. The movements were calm, unhurried. No spectacle. No attempt to impress. Within minutes, the engine roared back to life. Elena exhaled a sound that carried relief more than gratitude. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "I really appreciate it." He held her gaze a fraction longer than necessary. "We all need a jump start sometimes," he said. It was a simple sentence, harmless on the surface, but something in the way he said it carried weight. Above them, elevators were already lifting executives toward glass offices and packed calendars. Decisions were being made, markets were opening, schedules were tightening. Down here, beneath the building's polished confidence, something else had begun. The most important turning points rarely happen where people expect them. They happen where power forgets it is being watched. Neither of them understood yet that this was not just a stalled engine. It was the first choice in a story about imbalance, consent, and what it costs to truly listen. The engine of Elena's car continued to run steady, now almost too steady for the fragile moment that had just passed between them. For a second, neither of them moved. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A car drove past at the far end of the garage, tires whispering against concrete, reminding them that the world above was already in motion. Daniel stepped back from the hood and closed it gently. "You might want to get the battery checked," he said. "If it failed once, it may fail again." She nodded. "I will. Thank you. Really." There was a pause that could have ended the encounter. Instead, he asked, "Do you work in the building?" It was a neutral question, harmless on the surface, but questions are rarely neutral when asked by someone who already knows the answer. "Yes," she replied. "Operation support, temporary contract." She said the last two words quickly, as if clarifying her place in a hierarchy he had not mentioned. Notice how quickly we define ourselves by limitation when we sense we are being evaluated. Daniel leaned casually against his car, keeping his distance. He did not crowd her. He did not dominate the space. "How long have you been there?" he asked. 6 months, she said. "Maybe less if you count the probation period." "And do you like it?" She hesitated. That hesitation carried more truth than her eventual answer. "It is a good opportunity," she said carefully. "It is stable. Stable. Not fulfilling, not inspiring, stable. For many people, stability is not a preference. It is a victory." Daniel studied her without staring. He noticed the way she chose words that minimized desire. He recognized the architecture of restraint. It was familiar in a way he did not immediately understand. "You sounded frustrated," he said gently. "Before." Her posture stiffened. Embarrassment returned, this time sharper. "I did not realize anyone could hear," she said. "The garage carries sound," he replied. "Concrete does that." There was no accusation in his tone, only fact. She looked down at her hands. It was just a private conversation. "I understand," he said. "But understanding and undoing are not the same. Power complicates even the most ordinary moments. When someone with authority hears your vulnerability, the balance shifts whether you intended it to or not." Elena straightened slightly. "It does not matter," she said. "It was just a bad morning." Daniel nodded, accepting the boundary she was drawing. "We all have those," he replied. A faint smile touched her face, cautious but real. He checked his watch, not dramatically, just enough to signal time moving forward. "I should head upstairs," he said. "Me too," she answered quickly, as if suddenly aware of how long she had lingered. They walked toward the elevator lobby at the far end of the garage steps, echoing in unison, but not synchronized. She pressed the call button. The steel doors reflected their figures back at them, slightly distorted. He did not stand too close. When the elevator arrived, they stepped inside. The enclosed space felt different from the open garage. Smaller, quieter, more deliberate. She faced forward, eyes on the digital floor indicator. He watched the numbers climb. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes connection begins not with conversation, but with shared silence that feels intentional rather than accidental. At the 15th floor, the elevator stopped. She stepped out. "Thank you again," she said. Meeting his eyes one last time. "You are welcome," he replied. The doors slid closed between them. He continued upward. She walked down a carpeted hallway toward her desk, unaware that the man who had just helped her start her car was the founder and chief executive officer of the entire company. Above her, in a corner office lined with glass and skyline views, Daniel stepped out of the elevator into a different world. Assistants greeted him. Schedules awaited him. Decisions depended on him. But for the first time that morning, his mind was not on profit margins or quarterly forecasts. It was on a voice in a concrete garage that had said, "Sometimes I feel like the building was not built for people like me." And once power hears that sentence, it can never truly pretend it did not. Daniel closed the door to his office more slowly than usual. The executive floor was already alive. Assistants moved with quiet efficiency. Glass walls reflected morning sunlight across polished surfaces. Schedules were printed. Tablets glowed with notifications. Decisions waited to be approved. This was the world he understood, predictable, structured, measurable. He set his briefcase down and stood by the window, looking at the city stretching beyond the glass. Traffic lines crawled through downtown streets. Somewhere below, on level B2, a silver sedan had just re-entered the flow of motion. He could still hear her voice. "Sometimes I feel like the building was not built for people like me." It was not accusation. It was not anger. It was resignation. Resignation is far more dangerous than anger. Anger demands change. Resignation expects nothing. His assistant knocked gently. "You have the 8:30 strategy call," she reminded him. "Then the investor briefing at 9:15. He nodded. "I will be there in a moment." But he did not move immediately. He thought about the way Elena had said temporary contract, as if the word temporary defined more than her employment status, as if it defined her place in the building, in the hierarchy, in the room. He had built this company from nothing. He had prided himself on merit, on opportunity, on systems designed to reward talent. And yet someone inside his own structure felt unseen. Leadership is easy when the metrics are rising. It becomes complicated when the human cost begins to echo. Down on the 15th floor, Elena slid into her chair at precisely 8:12. She powered on her computer. She answered emails. She updated spreadsheets. She reviewed supply chain discrepancies and flagged minor inefficiencies that no one else seemed to notice. She was good at what she did. She was precise, observant, quiet. Her coworkers greeted her politely but briefly. No one lingered at her desk. No one asked about her morning. She preferred it that way. Attention felt risky. She told herself the conversation in the garage did not matter. The man had been kind, that was all. A stranger with jumper cables. She did not ask for his name. She did not want to know. Sometimes ignorance feels safer than context. At 9:15, Daniel entered the executive conference room. Screens displayed quarterly projections. Charts climbed upward. Market analysts spoke in confident tones. He listened, but not with his usual detachment. When a senior manager commented that temporary staff turnover was a manageable expense, Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Manageable, for whom he asked quietly. The room fell silent. For the budget, the manager clarified. Daniel leaned back in his chair. And for the people he pressed, there was no immediate answer. He had never asked that question in that room before. The first shift in power does not happen publicly. It happens internally when someone in authority begins to question their own assumptions. After the meeting, he requested a report on contract worker retention, internal mobility, and promotion pathways, not as a public initiative, not as a performance gesture, as data. Back on the 15th floor, Elena refilled her water bottle in the break room. Two colleagues were discussing the upcoming company-wide event scheduled for the following week. They say the chief executive officer will give a keynote, one of them said. Elena only half listened. She had never seen him in person. He existed in emails and formal announcements, a name at the bottom of polished statements. She returned to her desk and resumed her work. Above her, Daniel reviewed the internal report that had just landed in his inbox. Temporary employees rarely transitioned into permanent roles. Performance reviews were standardized but rarely personalized. Feedback moved upward slowly, if at all. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. He thought about a concrete garage, about a woman who believed the building was not made for her. He had not introduced himself. He had not corrected the imbalance. He had listened without permission. Listening without transparency creates a debt, and debt eventually demands repayment. At 4:30 that afternoon, Daniel canceled his remaining meetings, not dramatically, not publicly, one by one. He cleared the space. He was not yet sure what he intended to do with it. But he knew this much. The morning in the parking garage was not an accident. It was a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable when you finally decide to look. The next morning, Elena arrived earlier than usual. Not because she had decided to change anything, not because she felt inspired, because routine was stabilizing. The parking garage on level B2 was quieter at 7:25. Fewer engines, longer shadows. She parked in a different row this time, almost without thinking about it. A small adjustment, a subconscious shift. She turned off the ignition and sat for a moment before stepping out. No phone call today, no confession, just silence. She walked towards the elevator lobby, her footsteps echoing softly against the concrete. For a second, she wondered if he might be there again, the stranger with jumper cables and steady eyes. She dismissed the thought quickly. People do not repeat random encounters. They return to their lives. Inside the building, the 15th floor greeted her with the same muted professionalism. She logged in. She reviewed the overnight shipment report. She flagged discrepancies in vendor pricing that no one had asked her to examine. At 10:30, her direct supervisor stopped by her desk. "There will be a cross-departmental review this afternoon," he said. "Operations support will need to provide updated efficiency data." Elena nodded. "I will prepare it." He hesitated. "You will present it." She blinked. "I usually just send the file. This time they want context." He walked away before she could ask who they were. Her pulse quickened. Presenting meant visibility. Visibility meant scrutiny. When you have spent years mastering invisibility, being seen feels like exposure rather than opportunity. Upstairs, Daniel sat alone in his office, reviewing internal metrics again. Temporary staff turnover had increased steadily over the past 2 years. Performance reviews were procedural. Development pathways were vague. He tapped his pen lightly against the desk. At 11:15, he requested to attend the afternoon operations review. His assistant looked surprised. "You usually do not attend those." "I know," he replied. He did not elaborate. Change rarely announces itself with grand speeches. It begins with someone choosing to show up where they normally would not. At 2:15, Elena entered the conference room carrying her laptop and a printed summary. The room felt larger than usual. Representatives from multiple departments were already seated. Mid-level managers, senior directors. And at the far end of the table, Daniel Hayes. Her steps faltered for half a second. She recognized him instantly. Not because she had known his title before, but because of the stillness, the composure, the way the room subtly oriented itself toward him. He did not react visibly when she entered. No acknowledgement beyond a brief professional nod. She took her seat, hands steady but colder than she expected. The meeting began. Spreadsheets were projected. Cost-saving measures discussed. Targets reviewed. When it was her turn, she stood. Her voice was controlled, clear. She explained patterns she had noticed in supplier delays. She pointed out inefficiencies in inventory communication. She suggested minor structural adjustments that could prevent recurring losses. No one interrupted. Daniel listened, not as a stranger in a garage, as the chief executive officer. And that changed everything. Power transforms ordinary words into risk. The same sentence spoken to a peer does not carry the same weight when spoken upward. When she finished, there was a brief silence. A senior director cleared his throat. These are detailed observations for a contract role. Elena felt the old instinct rise. Apologize, minimize. Instead, she said, "The data was available. I reviewed it." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What would you change first?" he asked her. Not dismissively, not rhetorically. Genuinely, she met his eyes. "The communication bottleneck between departments," she replied. "It assumes temporary staff do not need access to long-term planning." The room shifted. Daniel did not look away. "And do they?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly, "if you expect them to contribute long-term results." There it was. Not a complaint. A principle. This is how imbalance becomes visible, not through anger, through clarity. The meeting ended without spectacle. No dramatic announcements, no immediate decisions. But when Elena returned to her desk, she felt something had moved. She did not yet understand the implications. Upstairs, Daniel remained seated after everyone else had left. He replayed her words in his mind. It assumes temporary staff do not need access to long-term planning. He had built systems that rewarded foresight, yet he had overlooked who was excluded from it. The parking garage had been a private moment. This was public, and he was no longer just a listener. He was accountable. The days between the operations review and the company event passed without visible disruption. On the surface, everything remained intact. Elena continued arriving early. She continued refining reports that rarely carried her name beyond internal documents. She spoke when asked. She listened more than she volunteered. She told herself the meeting had been procedural, nothing more. But something inside her had shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to be felt. In the break room, conversations about the upcoming company-wide event grew louder. "It is a big one," someone said. "Investors, media partners, full leadership presence." Elena stirred her coffee slowly. She had never attended one of these events before. Temporary contracts rarely required formal evening appearances, but an email that morning had stated clearly, "Attendance expected for cross-departmental contributors." Her name was included. She reread the message twice. Visibility has a way of arriving before we feel ready for it. Upstairs, Daniel reviewed the draft of his keynote speech. It was polished, strategic, full of measured optimism about growth and future direction. He deleted half of it. He removed phrases about efficiency. He reduced the section on quarterly expansion. He replaced it with something else. Responsibility, access, structural change. He did not mention Elena. He did not intend to, but her words had altered the shape of his thinking. It assumes temporary staff do not need access to long-term planning. He closed the document and leaned back in his chair. Sometimes one honest sentence can expose a blind spot years in the making. The night of the event arrived with a sharp clarity. The venue was downtown, all glass and reflected light. The city skyline shimmered beyond tall windows. Conversations blended into a low hum of practiced confidence. Elena stood near the entrance, smoothing the fabric of her dark dress. It was simple, not designed to impress, designed to be appropriate. She told herself this was professional, nothing more. Inside, executives gathered in tailored suits. Laughter rose in controlled bursts. Names were exchanged with calculated warmth. She kept to the edge of the room. Then the lights shifted. A subtle dimming, a cue. The host stepped onto the stage. "Tonight we celebrate not only growth," he began, "but leadership." Applause followed automatically. "And now please welcome our Chief Executive Officer." The name echoed across the room. Daniel Hayes. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She turned toward the stage. There he was. Not in a parking garage, not in a conference room, but elevated, spotlighted, defined. The composure she had recognized now carried context. The room responded to him with admiration bordering on reverence. Her mind moved backward in an instant. The jumper cables, the quiet question in the garage, the way he had listened, and the way he had not introduced himself. Equality is easy to believe in when hierarchy is invisible. It is far more complicated once it is named. Daniel began to speak. His voice was steady, measured, familiar. He spoke about growth, yes, but also about systems, about listening, about how organizations must examine who feels unseen within them. Elena heard the shift. She recognized fragments of her own language, reframed in corporate tone. She did not know whether to feel honored or exposed. When the applause rose at the end of his speech, she did not join immediately. Her hands remained still. The realization settled slowly but heavily. The man who had heard her private confession in a concrete garage was not simply a kind stranger. He was the most powerful person in the building. He had listened from a position she had not known existed, and power once revealed reshapes memory. As the crowd dispersed for networking, she turned toward the exit, needing air. Before she reached the doors, a voice spoke quietly behind her. Elena. Her name. She stopped. Daniel stood a few feet away. No spotlight now, no stage, just proximity. I did not want you to find out like this, he said. The honesty in his tone unsettled her more than the reveal itself. You could have told me, she replied. Yes, he said. I could have. The noise of the event continued around them indifferent. I listened that morning, he continued carefully. Not as a chief executive officer, just as a person. But you were, she said softly, even if I did not know it. Silence stretched between them. The true tension was never about attraction. It was about consent. He did not argue. He did not defend. Instead, he said, You deserve to know who was standing there. It was not an excuse. It was acknowledgement. An acknowledgement, while necessary, does not erase imbalance. For the first time since the garage, Elena felt the full weight of the distance between them. Not physical distance, structural. And she realized that what had begun as a quiet rescue now demanded something far more difficult than gratitude. It demanded accountability. The music inside the venue swelled again, filling the space Elena had just stepped away from. She moved toward the quieter hallway near the restrooms, heels echoing softly against polished marble. Her breathing felt measured but tight. Not panicked, not dramatic, controlled. Daniel followed at a respectful distance, not close enough to corner her, not far enough to pretend indifference. When she turned, it was deliberate. I need clarity, she said. Her voice did not tremble. He nodded. You deserve that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway was quieter than the ballroom, but still carried the distant hum of celebration. Laughter rose and fell in waves behind closed doors. You heard everything that morning, she said. It was not a question. Yes, and you chose not to tell me who you were. Yes. There was no hesitation, no attempt to soften the truth. Accountability begins with removing the instinct to defend. Elena folded her arms loosely, not in anger, but in containment. You listened to something I believed was private, she continued. You knew your title changed the context, and you let me keep speaking without that knowledge. Daniel absorbed the words. I thought interrupting would embarrass you, he said carefully. I thought stepping in quietly was the more respectful choice. Respectful for whom, she asked. The question hung between them heavier than accusation. He exhaled slowly. For me, he admitted. Silence followed. Intent does not erase impact. Good intentions often protect the person in power more than the person exposed. Elena looked at him steadily. You were kind, she said. You helped me. You listened in meetings. You asked real questions. She paused. But you also controlled the frame. Daniel did not argue. You are right, he said. There was something disarming about how quickly he accepted that. I should have told you in the garage, he continued, or in the elevator afterward. I told myself it did not matter, that I was just another person in that moment. But you were not, she said softly. No, he replied. I was not. The honesty did not resolve the imbalance, but it prevented it from deepening. Behind them, applause erupted again in the ballroom as another speaker took the stage. The world continued unaware of the recalibration happening in a hallway. I need to know something, Elena said. Were those meetings after the garage? Were they because of what you heard? Daniel considered the question. They were because of what you said publicly, he answered. In the review meeting. Your analysis was sharp, your perspective was structural, and privately she pressed. And privately, he said I was already listening. She studied him searching for performance. She found none. The real test of leadership is not whether it listens once. It is whether it changes after listening. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you, he said. The answer surprised her. He continued. If you prefer distance, I will respect it. If you believe this dynamic cannot be untangled, I understand. I will not retaliate. I will not reposition you. That is not who I want to be. She held his gaze. And if I stay, she asked. Then we address the imbalance openly, he said. Not by pretending it does not exist. That was new. No promises, no romantic language, no attempt to rescue her from discomfort, just structure. Elena turned slightly, glancing toward the ballroom doors. She imagined returning inside, imagined colleagues seeing them speak, imagined the assumptions that would follow. I'm not interested in being a story people tell about favoritism, she said. You will not be, Daniel replied. How can you guarantee that I cannot control perception? He admitted. But I can control policy, transparency, process. He paused. And I can start by making sure your contract is evaluated by a panel that does not report directly to me. The suggestion was precise, not emotional. She did not expect that. When power voluntarily limits itself, it signals growth. Elena felt something inside her shift again. Not trust. Not yet. Possibility. I need time, she said. You will have it, he replied immediately. She nodded once. For what it is worth, she added quietly. The morning in the garage felt real to me. It was, he said, for me as well. She searched his face for contradiction. There was none. The imbalance remained. But now it was acknowledged. An acknowledgement, while not a solution, is the first structural correction. Elena turned toward the ballroom doors. Then we start with honesty, she said. Daniel inclined his head. Yes, he replied. And for the first time since the parking garage, neither of them pretended the ground beneath them was level. They simply agreed to see the slope. The event ended without spectacle. No public confrontation, no whispered scandal. Elena left before the final round of applause, stepping out into the cool night air. The city felt louder outside the glass walls of the venue. Taxis passed. Streetlights flickered against pavement. Her reflection followed her in dark windows as she walked toward the subway entrance. She did not cry. She thought. Upstairs in his apartment overlooking the skyline, Daniel stood in silence long after the room had emptied. The applause still echoed faintly in memory, but it felt distant now. He replayed her words. You controlled the frame. She was right. Kindness had been easy. Transparency had been harder. Power does not correct itself through apology. It corrects itself through structure. The following Monday, the company received an internal memo. Not grand, not dramatic. It outlined a new review process for temporary contracts, clear promotion pathways, cross-departmental mentorship programs, anonymous feedback channels routed directly to an independent oversight committee. It did not reference a parking garage. It did not reference a conversation. It referenced data. Elena read the memo twice at her desk. Her name was not attached to it. No public acknowledgement. No performative credit. Just change. In the afternoon, she received an invitation to a small policy roundtable. A mixed group, junior analysts, contract staff, senior managers. Daniel would attend. She considered declining. Instead, she accepted. Growth is not proven by grand gestures. It is proven by repetition. The roundtable took place in a glass conference room that felt less intimidating than the executive boardroom. Chairs were arranged in a circle. No head of the table. Daniel arrived without an entourage. He did not begin with a speech. He began with a question. What barriers have we normalized? Silence at first. Then a junior employee spoke. Then another. Elena listened. Carefully. When her turn came, she did not look at Daniel. She addressed the room. Temporary roles are often excluded from long-term planning discussions, she said. That signals that contribution is conditional. No one dismissed her. Daniel wrote notes, not performatively, not for display. Later that week, a mid-level manager made an offhand remark in a hallway about contract staff being easier to replace. Daniel heard it. He did not respond publicly. He called the manager into his office. The next company update included language about language itself, respect, accountability, standards that applied across hierarchy. The shift was subtle but consistent. When power chooses to correct culture rather than defend ego, it becomes something else entirely. Elena watched carefully. She did not soften immediately. She did not romanticize change. She had learned that systems resist transformation. But she noticed. Meetings slowed down, questions opened up. Voices that had once remained silent began to surface. And something inside her adjusted as well. She stopped apologizing before speaking. She stopped shrinking in doorways. She allowed her ideas to occupy space without preemptive justification. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the event, she found herself back in the parking garage. Level B2. The concrete felt less oppressive now. Or perhaps she did. Daniel was there, leaning lightly against his car, hands in his pockets. He did not approach immediately. He waited. She walked toward him on her own. "Policies are shifting," she said. "Yes," he replied. "And you did not announce that it was because of me." "It was not because of you," he said. "It was because of what I realized." She studied him. "That matters," she said quietly. He nodded. "I am not interested in being someone who listens once and forgets," he said. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Cars started and stopped around them. This was not a romantic setting. It was the same place where imbalance had begun. Now it felt like neutral ground. "I am still deciding," she said. "About everything." "You should," he answered. "That is yours to decide. No pressure, no urgency, just space. The most powerful act sometimes is not pursuit. It is restraint." Elena looked around the garage, remembering the morning she believed no one important was listening. Now she knew someone had been. And more importantly, she was beginning to see that he had chosen to change afterward. Not for her approval, but because he understood that listening creates responsibility. The slope between them had not disappeared, but it was no longer hidden. And that in itself was movement. The week after their conversation in the parking garage unfolded with quiet tension. Nothing dramatic happened. No declarations, no visible lines crossed. But inside Elena, something was shifting. On Wednesday morning, an email appeared in her inbox from a competing firm. A recruiter she had spoken with months ago had followed up. Permanent position, higher salary, clear advancement track. She read the message once, then again. It was everything she had once told herself she needed. Stability, recognition, escape from temporary status. Her contract with Daniel's company was set to expire in 30 days. 30 days. The number felt both generous and urgent. Sometimes the real test of change is whether you would choose to stay if you were free to leave. She closed the email without responding. At her desk, she opened the latest policy update from internal communications. The mentorship program had launched. Contract employees were being paired with long-term managers outside their reporting chains. Feedback channels were active. She had received 3 direct requests for her input that week. Not because of Daniel, because of her work. That distinction mattered. Later that afternoon, she was called into a mid-level planning meeting. This time she was invited before the agenda was finalized. "We want your perspective early," a senior analyst said. Not as an afterthought, as foundation, she noticed the difference. Upstairs, Daniel watched the cultural metrics shift gradually. Participation increased. Anonymous feedback slowed but deepened in substance. Complaints about communication bottlenecks decreased. He did not attribute it to a single conversation. He attributed it to exposure. He had seen what invisibility felt like from the other side. That awareness did not disappear. That evening, Elena found herself in the parking garage again, but this time alone. Level B2. She sat in her car with the engine off the city's faint rumble filtering through concrete. She pulled up the recruiter's email. Her finger hovered over the reply button. If she left, she would leave on her own terms, not because of him, not because of conflict, because she chose something clearer. But if she stayed, it could not be because she felt seen by Daniel. It had to be because she felt seen by the system. Love that replaces one dependency with another is not growth. It is relocation. The following morning, she requested a meeting with Daniel, not in a glass office, in the same parking garage. He agreed. He arrived first, standing near the column marked B2-17. No jacket, no assistant, just presence. She approached calmly. "I have another offer," she said directly. He nodded once. "I assumed that might happen," he replied. She watched his reaction carefully. No panic, no persuasion, no attempt to compete. "Are you staying?" he asked. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. He stepped back slightly, creating physical space. "If you leave," he said, "I will respect it. If you stay, it cannot be because you feel obligated to me." "I do not," she said. "I hope not," he replied quietly. She met his eyes. "If I stay," she continued, "it will be because the environment is changing, not because you listened once." He nodded. "That is the only reason I would want you to stay." Silence settled between them, but it was not heavy. It was evaluative. She took a breath. "I am tired of shrinking," she said. "I do not want to build a career around avoiding discomfort." "Then do not," he replied. There was no emotional appeal in his voice, just alignment. True partnership begins when both people understand that walking away remains an option. Elena looked around the garage, remembering the morning she had felt small beneath fluorescent lights. Now she stood upright. Not rescued, not dependent. Considering. "I am not staying for you," she said carefully. "I know," he replied. "And I am not leaving because of you either." He gave a faint, respectful nod. "That is how it should be." She exhaled slowly. "I will give my decision by the end of the week," she said. He did not ask for a different timeline. He did not ask for reassurance. "Take the time you need," he said. As she walked back to her car, something felt clear for the first time since the garage confession. This was no longer about imbalance alone. It was about agency.
This
And
continues
whatever
only if it
decision
stays
she made
transparent.
next would
It
belong
does.
entirely to her. Friday arrived with unusual clarity. The sky over the city was pale and sharp, the kind of morning that felt decisive, even before anything had been decided. Elena arrived at the office early, as she always did. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop, but she did not begin with spreadsheets or supply chain reports. She opened the recruiter's email, then she opened a blank message addressed to human resources. She read both screens in silence. For weeks, she had been measuring change. Not promises, not tone, but structure, access, response. The mentorship program had matched her with a senior logistics director who did not report to Daniel. Their conversations had been candid, practical, unfiltered by executive presence. The roundtables had continued. Policy revisions had not stalled. Language around contract status had shifted internally. None of it was dramatic, but none of it was cosmetic either. Transformation that survives beyond the moment of embarrassment is the only kind that matters. At 10:15, she closed the recruiter's email. She did not respond. Instead, she finished drafting a proposal she had been building quietly for the past 3 days. A framework to integrate contract analysts into long-term planning cycles without disrupting reporting hierarchy. She sent it to the oversight committee, not to Daniel. At 11:40, she walked down to level B2, not because she had to, because she wanted to. Daniel was already there, standing near his car jacket, folded over one arm. He did not look surprised to see her. "I sent my decision," she said. He did not ask what it was. He waited. "I am staying," she continued. A faint exhale left him, but he did not smile broadly. He did not step closer. "Thank you," he said simply. She shook her head gently. "It is not for you, I know," he replied. Silence lingered between them, but it was no longer uncertain. "I am staying because the system is moving," she said, "because I can see space opening." He nodded once. "That is what I hoped." She looked at him directly. "But I need to say this clearly," she added. "If the change stops, I will leave." "That is fair," he answered immediately. No defensiveness, no negotiation. Accountability is strongest when it remains conditional. They stood there in the same place where imbalance had first revealed itself. The fluorescent lights hummed above. A car engine turned over nearby. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary structure. I am not interested in pretending hierarchy does not exist, she said. Neither am I, he replied. But I am interested in choosing how to stand inside it. That sentence shifted something subtle but permanent. He studied her for a moment. Then let us stand honestly, he said. Not as savior and rescued, not as executive and subordinate, as two people aware of the incline beneath their feet. She allowed herself a small smile. I am still not sure what this is, she admitted. Neither am I, he said. And for the first time, uncertainty did not feel threatening. It felt balanced. The healthiest beginnings are not built on fantasy. They are built on awareness. Later that afternoon, an internal announcement circulated, confirming expanded leadership pathways for contract staff. The Oversight Committee had approved Elena's proposal for pilot testing. Her name appeared among the contributors, publicly. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Not because of recognition, but because of validation. Upstairs, Daniel read the same announcement. He did not forward it. He did not claim credit. He did not call her. He allowed the system to function without his shadow attached to it. That evening, as employees filtered out of the building, Elena walked once more through the parking garage. Daniel stood near the elevator lobby this time. When she approached, he did not speak first. She did. I am glad you listened, she said quietly. I am glad you spoke, he replied. There was no need for more. The slope between them still existed, but it was no longer hidden, no longer denied. And as they stepped into the elevator together side by side rather than one ahead of the other, something new settled into place. Not rescue, not dependence, choice. 2 months later, the parking garage on level B2 no longer felt like a place of collapse. It felt like origin. Elena stood beside her car one evening, the engine already turned off, the concrete walls reflecting the soft glow of overhead lights. The air carried the faint scent of rain drifting in from the street above. She had stayed, not because of gratitude, not because of proximity to power, but because the system had shifted in ways she could measure. Her proposal had moved beyond pilot phase. Temporary analysts were now included in quarterly planning sessions. Mentorship meetings had become structured rather than symbolic. Language inside performance reviews had been rewritten to eliminate the assumption that temporary meant peripheral. None of it made headlines. But it changed the ground people stood on. Real change is rarely loud. It is structural, it is procedural, and it is sustainable. Daniel stepped into the garage moments later, loosening his tie slightly as he walked. He no longer waited in the shadows. He no longer stood 2 rows away pretending to be anonymous. He approached openly. You look thoughtful, he said. I am, she replied. They stood side by side, not touching, not performing closeness. Above them, 22 floors of glass and steel reflected the fading sky. I remember the first morning here, she said quietly. I thought no one important was listening. Daniel absorbed that. And now he asked. Now I know someone was, she said. But more importantly, I know that I am. That answer shifted the frame in a way neither of them could ignore. The goal was never to be saved. The goal was to be heard without losing oneself. He looked at her, not as a rescuer, not as an executive evaluating potential, but as a man who had been confronted by his own blind spots and chosen not to turn away. I cannot undo the imbalance, he said. The structure still exists. I do not need it erased, she replied. I need it acknowledged. It is, he said, and it will continue to be, she added. There was no grand declaration, no promise of forever, no dramatic confession. Instead, there was agreement. They walked toward the elevator lobby together. The doors opened. Inside the mirrored walls, their reflections stood level, not because the hierarchy had disappeared, but because awareness had equalized posture. As the elevator rose, she turned slightly toward him. If this continues, she said carefully, it has to continue with transparency. It will, he replied. And if it ever stops feeling balanced, she continued, I will say so. I would expect you to, he said. A faint smile touched her face. Healthy love does not demand silence. It demands dialogue. When the elevator reached the 15th floor, she stepped out first, not out of habit, but by choice. He followed without hesitation. The hallway felt different from months ago. She no longer measured her steps. She did not shrink in doorways. Her presence occupied space without apology. In his office later that evening, Daniel reviewed a new set of retention metrics. Turnover among contract staff had declined. Cross-department collaboration had increased. Internal survey responses reflected a subtle but meaningful rise in perceived inclusion. He closed the report and allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. The story had not begun with romance. It had begun with a stalled engine and a confession spoken in assumed privacy. It had moved through imbalance, confrontation, correction, and choice. Not fairy tale, not fantasy, process. Downstairs, Elena paused once more in the parking garage before leaving for the night. She looked at the concrete columns, at the space where she had once felt small. It no longer defined her. The most powerful transformation in this story was not that a chief executive officer listened. It was that a woman decided she would never shrink again. And as she drove out into the city lights, she understood something clearly. Power will always exist. Hierarchy will always shape rooms. But leadership is revealed in what happens after listening. And love, when it finally arrives, is not rescue. It is mutual responsibility chosen freely in full awareness of the slope beneath your feet.
Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched you, more of my most gripping stories are already waiting on your screen. Click one now. I promise you're gonna love it. See you in the next one.